Frank and Claire Underwood left behind a body count of over a dozen people, destroyed countless lives, and somehow made us root for them to win, all for the presidency. What started as a simple story about political revenge became something much more evil, a disturbing exploration of how power corrupts absolutely, and how far two people will go to get what they want. House of Cards did a great job at showing us Washington politics and the dark heart of American ambition. This is the story of how a rejected politician became president through murder, exploitation, and sheer ruthless determination. Season 1. Frank Underwood had everything mapped out. As House Majority Whip, he delivered the votes to get Garrett Walker elected president. His reward was the prestigious Secretary of State, but his future was bright and predictable. Then Walker's team stabbed him in the back. No Secretary of State position, no explanation, just a casual dismissal from people who owed him everything. Big mistake. What they didn't realize was that Frank Underwood wasn't someone you betrayed and walked away from. He was someone who collected debts, remembered every slight, and turned revenge into an art form. So Frank did what any reasonable person would do. He decided to destroy everyone who crossed him and take the presidency for himself. The plan was simple: eliminate his enemies one by one, while positioning himself for maximum power. And boy, was the execution brutal. His first target was Peter Russo, a troubled congressman with addiction issues. Frank didn't just ruin Peter's life, but orchestrated his entire downfall from relapse to career destruction, all while pretending to be his mentor and friend. When Peter finally figured out what was happening, Frank made sure he'd never tell anyone. Let's just say Peter's suicide wasn't exactly self-inflicted. Meanwhile, Claire was running her own operations. As head of a clean water nonprofit, she seemed like the perfect political wife. Beautiful, accomplished, idealistic. In reality, she was just as ruthless as Frank, using her organization to advance their political goals and destroying anyone who got in her way. The season introduced us to Doug Stamper, Frank's chief of staff and personal fixer. Doug was loyal and obsessed. Frank had saved him from alcoholism years earlier, and Doug repaid that debt by handling Frank's darkest work. Need someone discredited? Doug handled it. Need evidence destroyed? Doug made it disappear. Need someone to vanish permanently? Well, Doug could arrange that too. Frank's methods seemed almost reasonable. Every person he destroyed had it coming, right? Peter was a drug addict who endangered his constituents. The lobbyists were corrupt. The journalists were invasive. Frank wasn't the villain, he was cleaning up Washington. By season's end, Frank had maneuvered himself into the vice presidency, leaving a trail of bodies and broken lives behind him. The final scene showed him knocking on the Oval Office door, ready for the next phase of his plan. The message was clear: this was just the beginning. Frank had tasted real power and he wanted more. In the second season, we would see exactly how far he was willing to go to get it. And honestly, it was further than anyone imagined. Season 2, as aforementioned, Frank was at his most dangerous in this season. He was the vice president with nothing left to lose and everything to gain. He'd proven he could kill to protect his secrets. Now, he was ready to kill to advance his ambitions. The season revolved around Frank's exploitation of a massive crisis in China, turning international relations into his personal chess game. While Americans worried about war, Frank saw opportunity. Every crisis was a chance to make himself indispensable, every tragedy a stepping stone to more power. But his biggest challenge came from an unexpected source: his own past. Rachel Posner, the prostitute who could connect Frank to Peter Russo's murder, was in hiding under Doug's protection. What started as simple witness management became Doug's obsession. He wasn't just protecting Frank's secret anymore, but his own twisted relationship with Rachel. We learned just how deep the corruption went. Frank eliminated his enemies and recruited some. Journalists became his mouthpieces. Senators became his puppets. Even his wife became his co-conspirator in the most unexpected ways. Claire's storyline with the military sexual assault case revealed her true nature. She didn't care about justice or victims. She cared about what served their goals. When helping assault victims advanced her agenda, she became their champion. When those same victims became inconvenient, she destroyed them without hesitation. The season built to its inevitable climax, Frank orchestrating the president's downfall, not through scandal or impeachment, but through careful psychological control that forced Walker to resign. Frank didn't just want the presidency, he wanted his predecessor to hand it to him willingly. The final episodes were genius in political exploitation. Frank created problems he could solve, manufactured crises he could resolve, and positioned himself as the only person capable of leading the country through the chaos he'd created. When Frank finally took the oath of office, it wasn't a victory, but a coronation. He'd achieved something unprecedented in American politics. He'd murdered his way to the presidency, and nobody even suspected. The season ended with Frank in the Oval Oval Office, finally holding the power he'd always craved. Doug had eliminated Rachel to protect their secrets. Claire was positioned as the perfect first lady. Everything was going according to plan. But power has a way of revealing who you really are. And Season 3 would show us that Frank Underwood, President of the United States, was something truly terrifying. Season 3. Being president should have been Frank's ultimate victory. Instead, it became his greatest challenge. Turns out, actually governing is harder than scheming your way to power. Who knew? Frank struggled with the reality of presidential responsibility, creating jobs, managing international relations, dealing with Congress. These weren't problems you could solve with murder and manipulation. Well, not easily anyway. The real conflict emerged between Frank and Claire. For 2 seasons, they'd been perfect partners in crime. Now they were competing for the same spotlight, and their marriage began cracking under the pressure. Claire wanted her own power, ambassador to the United Nations, and she was ready to destroy Frank's presidency to get it. Maybe Frank had met his match in his own wife. Claire was every bit as ruthless, every bit as ambitious, and every bit as dangerous. The difference was that she was smarter about hiding it. Frank's approval ratings plummeted as his presidency faced real challenges. A Russian crisis, domestic terrorism, economic instability, these required actual leadership skills, not just political maneuvering. For the first time, we saw Frank truly vulnerable. The season culminated in something extraordinary. Claire abandoning Frank, not just politically, but personally. She walked away from their marriage, their partnership, and their shared criminal enterprise. We saw Frank alone in the Oval Office, abandoned by the one person who truly understood him. It was a brilliant setup for what everyone expected to be Frank's comeback season. How would he win Claire back? How would he salvage his presidency? How would he prove that Frank Underwood always wins in the end? Season 4. Who would have thought Frank and Claire would be in different corners as enemies? 2 master manipulators who knew each other's secrets, weaknesses, and deepest fears, now using that knowledge as weapons. Claire wasn't just running from Frank, she was running against him. Her own political ambitions put her in direct conflict with his presidency, and neither was willing to back down. The result was the most vicious political battle the show had ever depicted. But here's what made it brilliant. Even as they destroyed each other, you could see they still loved each other. It was a twisted, possessive, dangerous love, but it was real. They were soulmates in the worst possible way. Frank was at his most desperate in this season, facing potential impeachment, dealing with terrorism, managing international crises, and doing it all while his wife actively worked to destroy him. Any normal person would have cracked under the pressure. Frank Underwood wasn't normal. Instead of breaking, he evolved. He became more manipulative, more ruthless, more willing to sacrifice anyone and everyone for his goals. Instead of the presidency changing him, it had revealed what he'd always been underneath. The terrorist attacks gave Frank the crisis he needed to consolidate power. Nothing brings a country together like fear, and Frank was always good at providing that. He used the attacks to justify expanded surveillance, increased military action, and emergency powers that would make any dictator proud. Claire, on the other hand, was building her own power base, positioning herself not just as Frank's wife, but as a political force in her own right. Her congressional testimony against Frank was devastating. Not because it was all true, but because it was just true enough to be believable. The season built to an impossible choice. Frank could save his presidency or save his marriage, but not both. Any other politician would have chosen power over love. Frank chose Claire. The season ended with them reunited, stronger than ever, ready to face whatever came next as partners again. They'd tested their bond with betrayal, abandonment, and outright warfare, and their relationship had survived. If anything, it was stronger for having been broken and rebuilt. But their reunion came at a cost. Doug's loyalty was tested to its breaking point. Other allies were sacrificed, bodies piled up. The 5th season would test that partnership in ways neither of them expected. Because when you've climbed to the top by stepping on corpses, eventually someone comes looking for revenge. Season 5, if Season 4 was about Frank and Claire finding each other again, Season 5 was about them losing everything else. Their past crimes were catching up with them, their enemies were multiplying, and their hold on power was slipping. The season introduced Tom Hammerschmidt, a journalist determined to expose the truth about Frank's rise to power. Tom was investigating and crusading, driven by the memory of his murdered colleague Zoe Barnes. This wasn't politics anymore, it was personal. But the real threat came from an unexpected source, their own party. Frank's presidency had become toxic, and the Democrats wanted him gone. Not through impeachment or scandal, but through a carefully orchestrated campaign to deny him the nomination. Claire's response was ruthless. If they wanted to destroy Frank, she'd make sure they destroyed the entire party in the process. Her behind-the-scenes maneuvering made Frank's early schemes look amateur by comparison. I was stunned by how far the Underwoods' influence extended. They had dirt on everyone, leverage over every major player, and the willingness to use both without hesitation. Washington wasn't just corrupt, it was their personal criminal enterprise. But power based on murder and blackmail is inherently unstable. Doug's increasingly erratic behavior threatened to expose everything. ICO's terrorist attacks created chaos they couldn't control, and the investigation into their crimes was getting closer to the truth. The season culminated in the most audacious scheme yet. Frank and Claire engineering a constitutional crisis that would allow them to remain in power indefinitely. Not through legal means, but through careful manipulation of emergency powers and succession laws. The final episodes showed us the Underwoods at their absolute peak and their most vulnerable. They'd achieved unprecedented power, but they'd also created unprecedented enemies. Everyone who'd helped them rise to power was now a potential threat. The season ended with Frank facing impeachment and Claire positioned as his potential successor. They'd survived another challenge, but barely. And for the first time, you got the sense that their luck might finally be running out. But before we get to that final season, I want to ask you something. At what point did you realize Frank and Claire were the villains? Please share your thoughts in the comments. Season 6, the 6th season, changed everything. Frank Underwood was dead, officially from a heart attack caused by an accidental overdose of his liver medication, found cold in bed next to Claire. And Claire was now President of the United States. But this wasn't the triumphant conclusion to their partnership. This was Claire finally breaking free from Frank's shadow, and the results were more terrifying than anything we'd seen before. Without Frank's influence, Claire revealed herself to be the more dangerous of the two. Frank killed for power and revenge. Claire killed for the pure joy of winning. She'd learned everything from her husband and improved upon it. The season revolved around Claire's battle against the Shepherds, a wealthy family who'd been pulling strings behind the scenes for decades. They'd underestimated Claire because she was a woman, and she was going to make them pay for that mistake. Doug Stamper emerged as the season's tragic figure. With Frank gone, he was a man without purpose, desperately trying to serve a master who no longer existed. His obsession with Frank's memory drove him to increasingly desperate actions. The investigation into Frank's crimes intensified, threatening to expose not just his legacy, but Claire's role in everything they'd done together. Claire threw Frank under the bus completely, painting herself as his victim rather than his partner. But the season's most shocking revelation came in the finale. Doug, in his twisted loyalty to Frank, confessed to killing him. Doug saw killing Frank as the ultimate act of service, protecting Frank's legacy by silencing the man who could destroy it. Claire's response was swift and final. She turned the weapon on Doug and stabbed him, delivering an instant death blow. The last person who truly knew Frank Underwood's secrets died in Claire's arms, taking those secrets with him. The series ended with Claire alone in the Oval Office, having eliminated every threat to her power. She'd outlasted her husband, his allies, and anyone else who could challenge her authority. She was the last Underwood standing, the ultimate survivor in a game where survival meant everything. House of Cards was never really about politics. It was about power. Who wants it, what they'll do to get it, and what it does to them once they have it. What did you think of the series finale? Did Claire deserve to win, or was Doug right to try stopping her? And honestly, if you were in Frank's position at the beginning, betrayed and humiliated, what would you have done differently? Drop your thoughts below.